Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I am Tinesha Davis. This is Fun and Budget, and in this video we are going to answer a question. In the last video that came out talking about comments, responding to comments, Leona ETV asked, what are some tips you would give to a person who is a new landlord? And I said I would come back and make a separate video for that question. Y'all, this is that video. First of all, let me say, for those of you who are new here, why I'm a little bit qualified to answer this question. One, a lot of you were here because you watched my eviction journey where I had to go and have a tenant evicted who ended up destroying my house. I ended up having to get the house fully renovated, and then I went through the process of selling a home. A lot of you are here from that drama, right? So with that being said, I was a landlord for 12 years to one tenant. Only had one tenant in that property for 12 whole years. Okay, so that's one thing that qualifies me. Another thing is I do what we call house hacking. What that means is that I rent out bedrooms in the home that I live in a roommate situation, right? And that helps bring in extra income that can in turn help to pay the mortgage down faster. So that's what a lot of people consider house hacking, where you're able to use the property that you have and you're able to bring in income to help expedite the paying off of said property. I also have a timeshare, which I rent out successfully every year, and I'm adding that to my list of qualifications only because when I do rent out my timeshare every year, 1 week that I have, I do contract. And the main thing that's involved in doing that is to say that once you sign this contract that you are renting out this particular unit for this particular week, I don't have any other weeks, there will be penalties if you try to back out of that contract or break it. Why? Because I took this thing off of the market for you, one person, and because of that, I will lose opportunity if you do decide to break the contract. So there are penalties. Okay. So, and I've never had any issues with that. Nobody's ever backed out, and I've always had my money, made my money every year, renting out my timeshare unit. Okay. So with that, I am going to give you 11 tips that I would give to a brand new landlord. Feel free to chime in if you agree with these tips or nah. And remember, this is just based off of my experience and my experience alone. So I know a lot of you out there have your own experiences and this, that, and the other, and you know, yeah. So anyways, number one, I should have put these things in order because I have one tip. The first tip that I would say, this is the tip that I did not do that I wish I would have done. This is the tip that I wish somebody would have told me when I decided to become a landlord. This is the first tip, guys. This is the first thing I think you should do when you decide to become a landlord. Even before you have a tenant, even before you have the thing move forward, the first thing you should do, get a P.O. box. Get a P.O. box. There is never any need for your tenant or future tenants or applications or future applications or whatever. There is never any need for them to have your personal address. It is not necessary. Get a P.O. box. I did eventually get a P.O. box later in the game, but it was too late. My tenant already had my personal information. And again, this was 12 years ago. I didn't know any better, but that is something that I would have done differently. Okay. So that's number one. The second thing I would say, once you have a P.O. box, is to have a separate bank account. Do not commingle your rental income with your regular income. Keep that in its separate accounts. Make it so that your tenants can automatically pay the rent to that account. You know, in today's day and time, that is very easy for you to receive electronic payments so that you don't have to necessarily collect checks and you don't necessarily have to collect money orders or any other non-electronic form of payment. They can actually set it up so that it automatically goes to the bank account, that their rent is paid, things like that. I say the more hands off you could be, the better. Plus that frees up your time that of the mindset that the more time you can free up for yourself, the better. Now, I'm not saying that if a tenant doesn't have a way to pay you electronically, that it's a no-go. Checks are still a thing. Checks are still a thing. But that's the second thing I would do. I would set up a separate bank account, and I would also make it very easy for your tenant to pay rent to that bank account electronically. Okay? The third thing that I would do, and I'm not even sure if any of this is in order, but the third thing I would do, this is high on the list, let's say that. Run a thorough background check on the person, or however you choose to do it, who you are strongly considering renting your property to. Thorough background check. This is going to cost you extra money. I don't care. Do not skip it. There are several different kinds of checks you can do. Credit check is one thing. Okay. So with my tenant, I did do a credit check and I did do a background check, but I will also look further to make sure, because honestly, the background check that was ran on my tenant did not pull up certain information. It's been so long ago, I don't remember the correct terms. So I'm going to just tell you to do your own research, honestly. You want to make sure that you're running not just a financial background check to see, like, you know, what their financial status is and credit reports and credit checks, but you also want to make sure that there aren't any criminal charges out there against your tenant. Past criminal charges. You want to make sure that there aren't any past judgments. Well, not that you want to make sure that there aren't, but you just want to know about these things, because again, you may decide, even if these things come back a little, you know, you may decide to go ahead and give that person a pass anyway or whatever. But the point is, you must know. You must know. Pay the extra money to have these things ran. Okay. And I know in my story, a lot of people had said something like, I didn't do background checks and I didn't do different checks, credit reports and all of this. I actually did. And the other thing about it was this: my tenant was a Section 8 tenant, and Section 8 also runs background checks. Like, there's certain things that you can't do or you will be put off the program. You know what I mean? You can't have certain run-ins with the law. There's just certain things you can't have, or you can lose your Section 8 voucher. So that's that. Number 4, keep it professional. Keep it professional. I don't care how nice, how intelligent, how professional, how charming, how likable, how attractive your tenant is. Do not cross the lines of thinking that you guys are friends. You guys are in a professional business relationship. Keep it as such. And when I say that, I say no homie hookups. You have certain things in place. You have certain rules in place that you do not want to blur the line of saying, well, I'm going to let them pass on this. I know I said no pets, but you know what? We're going to let this slide. And if you do let it slide, get it in writing. If you say in your contract, no cats, and then you decide to go ahead and let them have a cat, put it in writing. Amend your contract for the new terms and conditions, because it's not that you saying no pets, but I'm going to let them have a pet, that's not the professional part. The not professional part is the part that you're not amending contracts as such, because you guys know there are places that allow pets, so that's okay. But if you say one thing and then you change your mind, or you decide to make an exception to the rule, keep it professional by making sure there is a binding contract that backs up whatever the new rule is or the new term and condition is. Okay? Keep it professional. If you're saying that your rent is due between the 1st and the 15th, and on the 16th there's a penalty, if the 16th comes and the tenant did not pay that rent, charge that penalty. Okay? Stay true to your word, to the word of your contracts, and that's what I call keeping it professional. Do not blur the lines of, well, you're my tenant, but we're kind of friends now. No, this is business. It's business. The next thing I would say is this. A lot of people say hire a property manager. I say evaluate if the property can afford to hire a property manager, okay? With that being said, you have to run your numbers. There are so many YouTube videos out there that teach you how to do this, that tells you what you should do, and what the percentages should be. And what that means is this: if you have a property, and the property, you have a mortgage on that property, how much does your rent have to be to A, pay the mortgage, to B, pay the property's expenses? Is the expense HOA? Or is that padded into your rent? Is the expense the water bill, the whatever bills, is that padded into your rent? Is the expense a property manager? Can your property afford to pay these things on its own? Plus the amount of surplus that you would need to successfully have a property that brings in income and doesn't just eat up everything that comes in just to run the property, okay? There are some other things that you're going to have to be mindful of. You're going to have to be mindful of repairs. When the property has to have repairs, how are you going to afford those repairs? Does the rent alone, maybe after time, maybe after a certain many months, does the rent alone create a cushion enough to pay repairs? Taxes, insurance. Can the property pay for these things, or are any of these things coming out of your pocket? That is what I would say you have to first consider when hiring a property manager. Can you truly afford a property manager? I know that a lot of times with us new landlords, the property isn't always that profitable to be able to afford a property manager, okay? A lot of people seem to think that a property manager is the end all be all to all the things, but I'm gonna tell you what it is. What the property manager does for you is it keeps you professional. Because sometimes as a human being, you may tend to fall into that blurred space of homie hookup, friendship, not quite professional, right? So a property manager can act as a front to keep things professional. That's one thing. The other thing is you have to realize that a property manager is a human being too. So while you may not be dealing with your tenant directly, you will be dealing with another entity. That other entity still has to be checked on. Are they overcharging you for things? When you take on a property manager, you have to make sure you read all of the fine print. Know what comes with that monthly fee. What does that monthly fee cover? And then what things will you have to pay a la carte if they become an issue? For instance, I had a property manager who, if they had to handle an eviction, that was going to be an additional fee, okay? Because just because you have a property manager does not mean that somebody's going to keep paying your rent. Just the same way you may not be able to collect rent from the tenant, the property managers have to go do the same thing where they can't collect rent from the tenants either. So you have to look to see exactly what does that contract include, what does the service provide, what does the service cover, what may have to come out of your pocket in certain conditions and in certain circumstances. Once you know what may have to come out of your pocket if X, Y, or Z happens, I say save up that money in emergency fund and put that in that bank account. So if those things ever do pop up, the money is there to take care of it. So with that being said, another tip that I have is to make sure you have a cushion. Make sure you have an emergency fund. What are you going to do if you're in between tenants? You got to make sure that you have the money saved up in your account to cover that mortgage, to cover the expenses in between tenants, okay? What happens if you have a tenant who just doesn't pay rent? You still have to pay that mortgage. So you have to make sure that you have the funds available to cover those expenses in times of lack. What happens when there's a leak? What happens when there's an appliance that goes out? What happens when there's an emergency that you have to pay for? That is what the emergency fund has to cover. So the thing I would say to a landlord is this: can you truly afford to be a landlord? If your answer is yes, make sure that you have that cushion set aside in the case of things not going quite as smoothly as we all would hope. Okay? Keep in mind that a house is a house no matter who lives in it. Things will break, things will age. Things will have to be fixed expeditiously. If you as a landlord do not fix things in a timely manner, you can actually be penalized for that. And I'm going to say penalized, right? Well, that's a whole nother video. That's a whole nother video. Who cares? But I was going to say that there are ways that tenants have rights, right? A tenant should not have to live in an unsafe situation or a dilapidated situation. So tenants could do something as easy as go to the local courthouse and file charges against you. If things are found in the tenant's favor, the courthouse can set up an escrow account where the tenant can pay rent to that escrow account and not you until you fix those issues. So this is why I say you have to be able to have the money on hand to fix issues in a timely manner. I always say, treat your tenant as you would want to be treated. With the cushion that you're going to keep in this extra bank account, I would say try to start at 3 months of expenses. Try to start at 3 months and go to as much as 12 months. Of course, this is all at your discretion, but I say 3 to 12 months is a comfortable cushion. The next thing I would say is to have a team, put together a team. This is something that I probably could have spent more time doing. I really didn't, especially in 12 years, right? And what that team would consist of is a reliable handyman, or 1 to 3 handyman. And I say 1 to 3 because sometimes the first person you call may not be available when you need them. So you should have some backup handymen, okay? A contractor. The difference between a handyman and a contractor, I would say, would be licenses. A handyman could actually go and do things and not necessarily have to have an official license, an official certification in said thing, right? Like if I have, let me see, what's something that a handyman can come by and do for me? Sometimes repairing drywall. Sometimes changing out light fixtures. Sometimes fixing minor toilet issues or repairs. Unclogging a sink, unclogging a toilet, things like that, okay? But then I would say also have a plumber on hand. Know a plumber or a plumbing company that you would use in the cases of when, you know, the tenant calls because there is a leak or there's a plumbing issue or the toilet won't stop running or whatever it is. Have a plumber on hand, have an electrician on hand for the cases where you do need to have licensed work done. Not something that's just jimmy rig, something that you may need some warranties behind in case something happens in the future, that sort of thing. I would also have, let me see. I got notes, y'all. Let me look at these notes. Wait. I would also say part of the team could be a real estate agent. The reason why I say a real estate agent is because a lot of times they can be helpful in getting you leads in between tenants. Okay. When looking for a new tenant, you can list as yourself, but you can also employ your local realtors. Okay. Where for a small fee, or depending on what you call small, the fee could also, this should also be a cushion. The fee could be as much as equal to the first month's rent, okay? So for that fee, they can also vet future tenants and run background checks on them. Check, ask questions, see exactly what they offer. But real estate agents should be on your team. And another thing that should be on your team is someone who can act as your proxy, especially if you're not using a property manager. A proxy can be somebody such as a family member or a friend, okay? And that proxy is going to be somebody who can stand in when you're not available. You're on vacation. You need somebody who can go and handle business on your behalf while you're gone. The last thing I would say to have on your team is a lawyer. A lawyer. A lawyer. The next tip I would say is set up an inspection schedule and keep it. Keep it. I would, at the minimum, have an inspection scheduled for once a year, at the minimum. In doing this inspection schedule, you're going to have it in your lease. Whatever that inspection schedule is, it's going to be one of the bullet points in your lease, okay? Whether you do it once a year, whether you do it twice a year. Or if you opt to do it more often than that, you're going to have your terms and your conditions in your lease, okay? You also will give them notice about 30 days about a month before the inspection, okay? You can also choose what your inspection schedule is on a case-by-case basis. What would be some cases where you may want to do it more often until you establish a relationship with the tenant, right? I would say if they have pets. If you have pets and you're allowing pets, you might want to get in there more often to make sure that the pets aren't putting more toll, more wear, more tear, more damage on the property than necessary. Things like that. Use your own discretion on what that inspection schedule is. But the most important things here is that, one, have an inspection. And two, to keep having your inspections. Because I know as humans, sometimes we could become lenient. Sometimes we feel like it's just not as convenient for us. But trust me, what's not going to be convenient is if you go in there 2 years later, 3 years later, or when they're getting ready to move and you see all of the damage or all of the things that have been done that you had no idea was happening. And it's not just for them, it's for you too, because sometimes it could be things that you need to get in there and update or fix, or maybe you're noticing, hey, this carpet is getting some wear and tear and it is time for me to change out carpets. There are some rule books, some guidelines on how often you should change out carpets, how often you should repaint the place, and this is for in the case of long-term tenancy. And I mentioned the lease. I said you're going to have that written down in your lease, your inspection schedule. So with that, that brings me to my next point. Have an iron tight lease. Y'all, if anything goes down, such as my case, y'all know what went down. That lease is going with you to court. That lease is your binding contract. That lease is going to be what the judge looks at, what the lawyers look at to uphold whether is there a breach of contract here. The breach of contract is going to be written in the terms of that lease. For instance, if I say no pets and you have pets, that's a breach. If I say you have 5 days to pay the rent and you always pay the rent on the 10th day, that's a breach. So you're going to make sure that your lease spells out the terms and the conditions that you want this relationship to operate under. Okay. I will do a separate video going over my lease. Okay. Now, you can have more in your lease than what I have in my lease. You can have less in your lease than I have in my lease. But I am under the belief that more is more. More is perfect. The more you have, the better. Not to be confused with complicated. You don't want your lease to be too complicated. And I will talk about an example of what that is as well, because I did see a lease that was so complicated. Even the judge was a little bit confused, and it could have went a whole nother way because the lease was just doing too much. The lease was trying to do too many things in one document. Let the lease just be the lease for the tenant-landlord relationship. The last thing I would say, this is number 11. The last thing I would say, that when all is said and done, as a landlord, keep in mind that this is your tenant. And you should always want the best for them. You should always want the best for them. And I say that because, again, I've come from rental situations, and you know how something can be broke, let's say a refrigerator. I've been in a situation where refrigerators were broken, and instead of the landlord replacing it, they would try to jimmy rig patch it for years until they can no longer, until the thing just gives up the complete ghost, and then they will replace it with something that they find at a junkyard. I just say treat your tenant how you would want to be treated, for real. Not to say that you have to go out and buy the top of the line of things. No, because it's still a business. It's still a business, and you do deserve to make a profit. But I'm just going to say do right by people. And with that in mind, it doesn't hurt to go above and beyond, to be a landlord who goes above and beyond. Maybe know the birth dates or milestones of your tenant. Be mindful, though, because, again, if your tenant is, let's say, a Jehovah's Witness, they may not celebrate birthdays, right? So be mindful of your tenant and their situation. But just know that things like gift cards for milestones are not only appropriate, I don't think that's crossing the line of professionalism. I mean, we all have employees who we work for who gives us gift cards and things like that, right? So I don't think it's inappropriate, but I do think that I do think that it could be a nice touch to show that even though our relationship is landlord-tenant, that we are still human beings sharing this planet together, and we are in each other's lives for the best, for the good. And I do think that that simple act of humanity and kindness can go a long way. For those of you embarking on this journey of being a landlord, or who are just starting out being a landlord, I wish you nothing but the best and much, much luck and success to you. Until the next video, y'all. Peace.